There are many biases that can creep into survey research. Hopefully, through a good eye, attention to detail, and pre-testing, you can minimize these. The first type of bias is a non-response bias. In other words, do people who are responding to the survey differ in some fundamental way from the people who are not responding? These days, with so many surveys out there, it is not atypical to see a very low response rate for a lot of surveys, especially if they're just being sent out to a large group who aren't particularly engaged in the topic. So sometimes you just have to live with a lower response rate, but any rate below 20 or 25% can result in a strong non-response bias. So if you only have a 5% response rate, these might be only the really angry people, or maybe only the really happy people, but you wouldn't feel really good about generalizing this to all of the people in the sample. Demand effects can be particularly common, especially with interviews. The respondent usually wants to please the person who's asking the question, and sometimes the interviewer may intentionally or unintentionally give indications regarding what sort of answer is required. For example, I'm conducting this research study regarding attitudes toward the environment for the Save the Wilderness Foundation. In a case like this, people will know that you're looking for answers that favor an environmentally friendly response. Similar to this, you can have a leading question where a person is biased to respond in a particular way, such as, do you believe that excessive taxation that destroys business is hurting our economy? In a case like this, it's very apparent what sort of answer they're looking for. Social desirability bias can also creep in, and it can be a bigger problem with surveys where anonymity is not present. Typically, people want to present themselves in the best light, often because they actually see themselves this way. Let me give you an example. Out of 100 people, where would you rank yourself on the following dimensions? Kindness, ugliness, and intelligence. People will tend in a situation like that to put themselves in a very attractive light. So you won't find a lot of people indicating that they rank lowly in terms of kindness or ugliness. I previously gave you an example of a leading question where it was pretty obvious what sort of answer was being looked for. Sometimes unintentional question wording can creep in as well. So, for example, when people were asked about the level of government spending for welfare versus assistance to the poor, the following was observed. For welfare, about 45% of the respondents felt that too much was being given out. But if it was assistance to the poor, about 62% said that there was too little. So the way we frame a question, the way we phrase these things, subtly or not so subtly, can have an impact on the response observed. Sometimes when you're coming up with questions, it's really clear in your mind what you're looking for, but it isn't necessarily clear in the respondent's mind what you're looking for. One of these situations would be an ambiguous question. An ambiguous question makes it very difficult to respond to, so let me give you an example. Do you use government services regularly? Yes or no? First, we could ask, what is a government service? Are they talking about dealing with the IRS? Are they talking about driving on the road? Are they talking about Social Security? It could be really, really open in this regard. And then second, in a case like this, what does regularly mean? Once a day, once a week, once a month, and so forth. Make sure that you're doing your pre-testing to make sure that the question is truly meaningful and that the response will be useful at the end of the day. An unanswerable question often arises because the researcher is so close to the topic at hand. They don't understand that the layperson might not have full comprehension of the wording or the terminology being used. Let me give you an example. How many kilowatt hours of electricity did you use last year? Now, for most people, they won't even be able to answer this. They don't know what a kilowatt hour of electricity even is. Would it surprise you if I told you that this was actually a question I saw on a real survey? I will point out as well, be careful when you're asking questions because just because people can't answer the questions doesn't mean that they won't. So if you're asking them questions like this, they will make up numbers. They will tell you things. It's just that at the end of the day, none of it will mean anything. Double-barreled questions arise when you're asking two questions at the same time. So for example, do you approve of the government's education and healthcare spending? Well, you might agree with the education spending, but not the healthcare spending, or the other way around. In a case like this, you really should break the question into two parts. When we were talking about survey design, I noted that one of the advantages of using a closed-ended response scale was that this is usually easier to answer for the respondent. One of the downsides, though, is that you have to make sure that you've got all of the appropriate categories in there. Now, let me give you an example of a non-exhaustive question where we ask people to indicate their employment status, either full-time, part-time, or unemployed. Now, you're going to have to trust me on this because I actually created this question a long time ago. Retired people get very, very angry when they're presented with these options. They don't consider themselves unemployed. Sometimes you'll have a question where the answers are not mutually exclusive, and in a case like this, the answers even overlap. What is your age? Under 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 40, and over 40. It's not really clear which item the 30-year-old is supposed to respond to. Sometimes a bias doesn't come from a specific question, but it comes from the sequence of the questioning. For example, is sterility important in a grocery store? Is cleanliness important in the delicatessen? Is cleanliness important in the bakery? Is cleanliness important in the meat department? Are clean-shaven employees clean in appearance? What do you think about employees with beards? So with this sequence, don't be surprised if people aren't really keen on employees with beards. Now, sometimes the sequencing isn't this deliberate, but bias creeps in because previous questions that dealt with patriotism, safety, cost saving, mortality, and so forth. All I'm saying is just be aware that the placement of different survey items might affect items that come after them. On this slide, I've got 3 points regarding pretesting. As you might guess, I'm pretty keen on people doing pretesting to make sure that their survey is going to work. Pretest can range from a handful of people through to around 20. Trust me on this. Maybe you've been developing this survey for the last 4 weeks. You've involved a lot of people. It's now in your hands. You're ready to get it out into the field, and you won't want to pretest. You'll just want to get it out in the field because you've been waiting so long to do so. Hold back. Restrain yourself. Make sure that you pretest. Pretest, pretest, pretest. Please pretest your survey on other people before sending it out for the general response.